So, welcome to another HR conversation, and we've got an extra visitor today that I'm going to let Eric Torigian from Akibono introduce in 1 second. But of course, we have the lovely Danielle Leath from Hub, your benefits. What was it? Benefit guru, I think you got introduced as
No,
today.
benefits wizard.
Benefits wizard. Can girls be wizards? Sure, you can, right?
Sure.
Girls can be wizards. Yeah.
Equal opportunity.
Right. And then we get James Reid, our current regular legal attorney with Dinsmore. If you talk to James, I don't know, man. It's one of those things you hope you don't have to do, but if you do, you love him because he's fantastic. And then myself, Calum Maclean, with the HRS and payroll side tech company Paylocity. But Eric, I'm going to let you introduce Holly. Who is she? Where is she from? And why is she here today?
Yeah, no, thank you, Cam. It's awesome. And I think Holly's going to fit right into this crew, and we're going to have a really good HR conversation today. But I had the chance to meet Holly recently, maybe about a year or so ago, because we live next door to each other, and my kids are in love with her two dogs. So every time we're walking, my kids will run to see the dogs. So Holly and I started chatting, and it ends up that Holly is an executive counsel for labor and employment at GM. So we have obviously hit it off with a lot to talk about. Her personality is sharp and bright and funny and witty, and we just always have really good, bright conversations. I think right now, one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast and this format is open up and let people hear. These are what HR conversations sound like. When you start to get these people in a room, this is what it sounds like. And she fit right in perfectly, and I think it's going to be a fun conversation. So, Caleb, awesome. You do such a great job as our MC.
Oh, so lots of. I've got two teenage daughters. I'm used to wrangling and trying to direct conversation to places where it's supposed to go rather than where it usually ends up. But so James and I were talking last Friday. We had a little conversation about election employee hell. I'm having such a hard time talking today. So employee election hell, and we were talking. James made the great point of, you don't have a First Amendment right in a private employer. That just blew my mind. And my wife, who's the smartest person on the planet as far as I'm concerned, because she watches these, she was, I said to her, I said, did you know that? She went, that's crazy. I had no idea. And then Eric said, oh, I know someone that manages a whole bunch of people. How many employees does GM have right now?
About 200,000 globally.
Yes, so
50,000, 94,000 in the United States.
And you're responsible for. You got a lot of weight on your shoulders, young lady. You're like the real deal. We're kind of a little bit of fanboy moment here of having like a really big attorney on our little podcast. But so when we were chatting, you brought up a couple of really good points of what GM is doing, because what you're doing at a 200,000 employee company translates sometimes just as well to a 100 employee company, right?
Absolutely. I think in terms of this election process, we've been taking, and again, I would probably use this as more of a structure for people to think of things, and everybody jump in, is that I think you start with what is the company's policy going to be relating to the political situation. In my organization and others I've worked for, we have to be, given the nature of the work, we have to make both sides of the political aisle happy, so nobody's taking a position one way or the other with respect to candidates, and is trying to be as neutral as possible and respectful as possible. Then we talked, obviously, as you guys said, and going back to what James said about the First Amendment doesn't apply in private sector employers. Let me tell you how that worked when I did a training for 1,000 people and stood there and said, I just need to give you a little myth here. First Amendment doesn't apply. Within the boundaries of state and federal law, we can tell you what you can do and what you can't do. And let me tell you, it was like pins dropping in the meeting. But we do look at, how we want people talking, how we want people addressing email, posters, and clothing, and how we deal with political visits. And then some of the end croppings of all of these, we looked at issues like graffiti and how to make sure that people aren't defacing each other's opinions and people aren't targeting each other. And those were kind of the way I've been, kind of a conceptual thought.
You can deface an opinion.
Yeah, hang on. We'll show you how.
Go ahead, Eric.
So Holly, you and I talked the other day over coffee, and we were talked a little bit about one of the mechanisms, and it's one of my favorite mechanisms, and it makes HR hated at times. But can you talk a little bit about how you use the non-solicitation policy to sort of help shepherd through some of this?
Yes, what we've done on the non-solicitation policy is, and this horror that we've all lived with COVID has helped strengthen this right now, but we've taken the position that we do not allow political conversation, period, across on people's work time in working areas. We take the position it's just not going to happen, and the reason why is we're very consistent with this because we mean it about all other non-work related conversations. So you use the no solicitation policy very carefully, very, very carefully, to make sure that you treat everybody the same. And like email, we don't allow private companies and charities and other people to join and that type of thing. Our use of Yammer for some of our groups in our organization, it isn't a free-forming, you can have your, I want to sell something and any of that. It's really for work-related reasons only. And that's one way we've been very good at working with no solicitation.
I know a lot of times we end up taking positions as HR professionals that makes us unpopular. And I can tell you examples from my background, and you probably have some too. I'd love to hear yours, of times when a band wanted to come play at the Christmas party and we had to tell them no because it's non-solicitation. We can't let any of this happen. And how do you handle that, or how do you coach an organization through that where they want to look the other way because this one looks like a good idea?
And we've been really, the only thing that we've ever agreed upon, and again, the minute you start opening the door of the no solicitation policy, the more you have challenges, is one thing we've done is for groups like Toys for Tots or a charity or an organization that the organization as a whole or the plant as a whole has decided they want to sponsor for a particular thing, we've allowed some things, mostly off work hours type of things with this. One of the interesting dynamics we faced with the this situation is with COVID, our organization with the playbook and other organizations I've worked with the health and safety playbooks have said there are no visitors, no outsiders, there is no literature. We are not going to allow, obviously with the exception of lunch hour and stuff, we're not going to allow people to gather up and have private meetings in rooms and things because of the safety issues and the things about ensuring mask wearing and ensuring social distancing. So in some ways that's helped us. This horror that we're all kind of challenged with right now has helped us with the fact that we're saying, you know what, I really respect your political beliefs, or I respect that you want these people to come in like a situation like a band or a really cool organization. Or the new one we've heard is that a tragedy happens in a family and the organization wants to get around it to have a GoFundMe meetup or have a charity drive, in the plant. And we've been very, very sensitive to it and offered up donations and other things, but we said not really at the plant right now.
So I find this fascinating to have a legitimate policy be utilized, such as COVID, to help solve other employment issues. So I think that's great. I guess a couple of elephants in the room are, what would you do when sometimes silence could be interpreted as a position? So do you allow BLM or LGBTQ pins or clothing to ever be worn anywhere on the premises?
I will say this for purposes of what's out there publicly. This is a continuing debate across all employers across the country about this. As we've seen with Goodyear and others that can get in the spotlight and Starbucks and other places. Our position has been right now that we are authorizing BLM branded wear. We are not taking, and we are also taking an interesting position at this moment. Again, I think it's not in a written policy and it's being evaluated as circumstances occur. But the position has been that if someone raises a complaint about any of this, we're asking people to just turn their shirts inside out and not. But the only thing that's been basically authorized at this point, and we are open to these things, is the BLM branded materials. But if and it's as you said, it is the elephant in the room, because it, you know, the minute you start going in this, all these causes are very, very important and core to a diversity and inclusion initiatives. But we also have to remember that, just like with everything, and I'm not saying the BLM situation is like this, but any discourse like this, it can be work disrupting, productivity draining, fury inducing on everybody's part, and also safety, you know, safety challenges. So where we've done things where we've had situations all over, in other places I've heard too, that have had situations where people wear something that's really offensive, and the organization has immediately said, turn it inside out or go home. We're not going to, you know, this is just not the right thing to do.
So question for you though, sorry, Eric.
No, sorry,
Question
Danielle.
on the in-person, you're talking about graffiti and t-shirts, wearing of hats and pins, but obviously a lot of us are in a virtual world still at this point. How far reaching do these mandates go? I ask because a real life example, a business colleague of mine has an Instagram account set up that advertises his business, in addition to being extremely outspoken about his political perspective. How would you investigate, or how would you address something like that?
And this is an area, as in general, and Jim, please jump in on this issue about off-duty conduct. The truth of the matter is that issue is currently hotly debated across, you know, the United States. There's cases coming out and things like that. But one of the things we've done with off-duty conduct is we've taken the position that if the person, like I have a Facebook account or something, and I say I represent General Motors, and I'm bold and, you know, loud and bold about it, and then I start saying things that would be an otherwise violation of our winning with integrity and our policies on a racist brand. And we don't socially spy on our employees or have a, you know, a department set aside that says, oh, I'm going to check all the what people's accounts look like. But when we do get complaints that are brought directly into the workplace, where someone is working right next to, we have whole families work on the same line or at different shifts together, and they say, look, this person just posted a horrible picture of something that I don't want to even mention on on here, or a meme of something that's just horrible. We do investigate, talk about it, and then we decide whether it really is a work rule violation, or whether we can, at least at the minimum, ask the person to take the post down, or at the very least take the reference to General Motors down, because we don't want to, as our brand is.
There's where a big trick comes in. If they represent themselves as a leader of the company, and then they also represent some value, let's not even take it to the extreme, any value that's counter to yours, but then where do you draw the line? So if I have someone who says I'm a Akibono quality engineer, and they put a picture of installing Brembo brakes on their car, well, how do I handle that?
See, I break these down, and we've been, at least I have, at least my opinion here is I've been breaking them down into the categories of the hostile work environment and offensive conduct part. And then the other one, breaking down into the proprietary information types of things with breaks. And then we've actually kind of thought of it as, we have a pretty solid social media policy that talks about the fact that, number one, you cannot represent the opinions of General Motors without specific authorization from the certain leaders. Part two, on the issue of hostile work environment, we say that hostile work environment in terms of intimidation, fear, harassment, discrimination, and that type of stuff applies to your use of social media, especially when you're branding to General Motors. And then we do look at the issues of safety. If somebody is posting videos or something of someone working on brakes, or like the example you used, Eric, and there's something proprietary about it, you know, like you take a picture of a hot model of a vehicle that you've signed, some of our local plants will sign non-disclosure agreements for new launch products, and all of a sudden it's out on Facebook. That is a violation. On the issue of things like when somebody is taking pictures of their using brakes and stuff, we have policies that say you can't take pictures of stuff in the workplace, but I do one extra review of those areas to make sure somebody's not complaining about a product defect or a process defect or a safety concern.
Those are all great points. I think Eric's question, if I understood it to the extreme, was more like the Britney Spears being under a Pepsi contract and drinking Coke.
Exactly. Well, yeah.
What happens if you post on Facebook that you're buying a different branded car? Is that something that you should be disciplined for?
I am not aware in the organizations that I've represented that we've gone after that, but I do think if you are the CMO, the chief marketing officer of the organization, and you're driving a Beamer or you're driving a Ford,
not a good look. It's not a good look.
That's got a problem. And we have had such a tough one.
It's a tough one. But let me tell you one quick story. I had a UAW meeting, and it was a contentious meeting, and the division. I can't remember their term for them now, but basically the UAW rep and I flew out to St. Louis to meet with this person. We sat in the conference room, everything, and he comes in, and the first thing the employee says is he's complaining to his union rep, and he said, they made me park across the street. And the union rep said, why would they do that? Because, well, I just got a brand new BMW, and they wouldn't let me drive it on the lot. And I swear to God, that guy closed his notebook, looked at me, and he said, this meeting is over. That guy violated the rules, discipline him. So
we actually have parking lots like that. I came to this organization 6 years ago with a product that I really believed in, but it wasn't one that was made by my company. And I went in the garage, and there's like these little parking spaces that say American made or Detroit made vehicles, and there's other places for other vehicles. And I was quickly disabused very politely of the notion that I work for, or I should represent the vehicle, and I made sure I had a different vehicle. But the only thing we found in those, Eric, and I will tell you an interesting one on that one. The one thing we have had is some people have come, we do have very segregated parking in those situations for products made in the United States and products not made. One of the important things is if somebody came to you with a safety issue, a disability issue, or a concern for being able to get to the door closer, because some of the parking areas tend to be a little closer to the front door, we would obviously work with those individuals and honor those concerns too.
But we're going to circle back around to the employees and the heat and the fact that me and James talked about it. There's not a tremendous amount of time between now and the election, and there's so much distraction with Black Lives Matters and with the economy and with the fires in California that's taking up the majority of the news. There's going to be a real short time to get people's attention, so people are going to run a little bit hot. And so, Holly, you were talking about how to stop the graffiti in the bathrooms, because that's where, they're a bunch of boys, right? Some of them are still teenagers, right? And they're going to write on the walls, and they're going to say, oh, my guy's great, your guy sucks, but it's not going to be quite that PC. It's going to be pretty brutal. So how many people do you have in some of your plants? Thousands, right?
Thousands. Some plants I've worked with are literally thousands. And there's 40 or 50 bathrooms in a facility. So what we've been doing is making sure we have a clear policy, obviously, on the graffiti and discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. But the other thing also is we have a triage procedure built in, so that if there is graffiti, there is a certain key set of people that are made aware: security, labor, legal, HR, and we have a facilities team that immediately take appropriate pictures with security and then clean the graffiti. But some of the ideas that we've been starting to proactively think through are the possibility of putting signs up and telling people straight up, for every day you keep the bathrooms clean, we're going to make a donation to a particular charity. So that's one of the more creative ideas. There was a creative idea, and I'm not sure it's workable in a restroom, but the concept of a mirror, with the fact that there's some neuroscience that says self-awareness. When we look in a mirror, and if you guys have ever noticed, if you're in a store or something and there's one of those mirrors out there and you're making faces or doing something funny, the minute you go by a mirror, you stop. There's some research now by Cialdini. He's the guy that does a lot of amazing professor with work on negotiations and persuasion. And he's saying that maybe mirrors and other ideas like that may be a way to get people to really, even in the short term, stop this type of behavior. So that was some of the ideas we had to promote civility and productivity and safety. I think those are the really key messages we keep trying to get across with people.
promote civility. Danielle, what are you thinking about? I love the word promoting civility in an environment where there's thousands of people, even family members. You said there's family members on the same line together, right, for decades.
For decades.
What I'm curious about is you're kind of talking about the graffiti in the bathroom. I'm going to put you on the spot, but what is the more crazy or just curious story that you've encountered over the years, whether it's bathroom graffiti or otherwise, that you've had to address?
Well, there's two types of ones that I've had some really curious ones over the years, over my 27-year career. There was one that was very concerning, is there was some graffiti written on a wall that was pretty offensive with the language. We're not all, innocent to the language, but it was pretty shocking to see it all in writing. But the problem was with originally, you look at it, take pictures, we know who did it because people told us, and we could actually figure out by badging who actually might have been in the bathroom around a certain time that somebody had noticed this graffiti. So we figured out who did it. Interestingly enough, well, despite the language, there were some also cries for help within it. So in this situation, the person was actually mentally having some challenges and potentially contemplating not being around the world with us, living in the world, because he was getting harassed and hassled by some people. And this was a way of his cry for help. So that was kind of unusual in the sense that when I saw this, I kind of took it as the typical, okay, dude, this was when you were 1 year old or 3 years old and you wrote, or I guess 3 years old don't use bad words, but you write swear words on the board, and we did this in high school, cut it out, there's a policy, you're disciplined. But then when we looked underneath it, it was pretty scary that there were other cries for help. I've had other employees write some I was actually surprised. Two other ones I think of, but a couple other ones are just more in terms of content. A couple of them were some people that were brilliant artists that drew some way more graphic than I want to even discuss. And I was like, wow, you had enough time to sit in the bathroom doing this kind of detailed drawing. And I also
worry about advertise your work.
Yeah. And then a couple of others. One thing we've had some ones where people have written hateful things, racially hateful things and stuff like that. And we couldn't really pin it down, but we did. And there are limited circumstances, and where it works is calling in a crime lab handwriting expert. If you can narrow it down to certain people as to who may have done it and who may not have done it. This is one interesting little story I thought was funny, is that shiny surfaces, bathroom surfaces, make it hard for a handwriting examiner to actually get really good samples and stuff like that. So we've had situations though where a handwriting analyst was able to narrow within a certain amount of time. One other thing that we've done on graffiti where it's a he said, she said, and we really don't know who did it, is we've brought in special investigators that have U.S. attorney and types of criminal type backgrounds and stuff, law backgrounds, to come and assist HR with the interview process and utilize their credibility to actually make the decision on graffiti. Based on this facts, based on these interviews, we believe this person more likely than not did things, and then decide what to do to take action.
Yeah, the honest belief rule is a strong defense in many situations. Listening to this interview, I'm thinking about creating this waterfall bathroom stall that has water coming down so no one can write anything anywhere. Maybe get this patented and share my new invention. That's the solution. Make it impossible to write.
Let me put an interesting little spin on this, and I want to get Holly's impression of this. I think that this is a great interview, or a great person for an interview, because the scale really changes things. When you have an assembly plant like Bowling Green, where you've got 2,500, 3,000 people. I remember I had a plant at Ford back in the day where we had 4,000 people on the grounds. You're not running an unemployment anymore. It's not just like running an office. You're running a small city, and you have a fire department, and you have a security or police department, and you have a medical team, and you've got, the plant manager's like a mayor, and you have council. And Holly, what's your perspective of that? How have you seen that kind of an impact in the workplace, which complicates it from just a simple office environment?
Well, we've had plants that are up to 5,000 or 6,000 people in one plant. And the truth of the matter is you are 100% right. It is really comes down to your plant leader is your mayor of your city, basically your city. Your human resources department is the glue in some ways that really holds together the social environment. And then we have whole medical departments, we have police, and we have fire, and we had whole special investigations teams and stuff like that. And then you have the community relations team and communications team. So it's made it, when you have small scale, it's, I liken it to a family, a small family, you know, and you can try to solve things in a smaller routine. But then when you have that type of size there, you have to be ready for every possible opinion on the planet, every possible behavior, and making sure that the key teams are constantly talking with the leadership. And I think one thing that's really important is your communications department is also one of the most important groups. Because like what we did, I can tell you that in training, when we were allowed pre-COVID, we had a situation at one very large plant with some very interesting events. And we ended up doing a week and a half of training, live face-to-face training, a half hour to about an hour each with groups of employees to really get and do focus groups with them within the boundaries of the law and focus groups, but you know, to really make sure plant stand-downs, organizational stand-downs. When we've had very major events that have been things that have gone past the pale, the organization will take the time to shut down the plant and have everybody stop. You do it for safety, you do it for quality, you do it for these events, and there will be communications, union leadership, HR, everybody, the leadership of the plant, and we talk to people immediately about these events.
Wow, you shut down the plant? Isn't that expensive? I mean, when you stop the line, like
I don't know all the
of
numbers,
thousands.
but they were lots of zeros is what I was told.
Yeah, per hour.
No,
Yeah,
per minute.
Per minute.
Oh, no way.
And you know what? We give the union relationship gets a lot of attention and the contentiousness of it. But I'll tell you, when it really gets into a trying situation, that partnership with the UAW and the automotives is incredibly strong and incredibly healthy. And I can remember September 11th, after that tragic event, on September 12th at my plant, we had a racial issue boil over, and we had across the main hallway 2 groups of people on both sides of the hallway yelling and screaming at each other with sticks and brooms and everything. And the union chairman called me at home at 1 a.m. and said, "Come on in." And I was like, "Come in? Well, I'm not coming in. We come in." But it took both of us together, and the plant has to see you aligned. So I think we do give a lot of that relationship gets a lot of negative light, but I think there's a lot of positives. And I think, Holly, you and I had a conversation the other day about this. I'd love to hear your comments too.
I think the key thing is we have the thing called the key 4 at every plant. That's your top union leadership, a shop chair, shop committee, and our top union management leadership. And that relationship meets daily. And without the union, we would, you know, we need that key partnership to help. Now, I will say, in fairness, is in a human science that we have now, it's not even science, an art of humans, it happens everywhere that sometimes we've worked with the union at the higher levels to make sure that certain union facilities aren't the ones encouraging the behavior and aren't encouraging the, and we've had that. It's not unusual that people are human and both sides, you know, union and non-union people, but we've had situations. I remember one location years ago that was near Ferguson and is not far from that. And the union leadership, management, and everybody saw the thing coming. We want people productive, safe. These are clearly major events. We need to be respectful of them, but we also need people safe in multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-racial organizations. We needed to have control. So they did plant stand downs, or, you know, they did some training. The union wrote joint letters with us saying that there is certain behavior that will not be condoned. But I think it's I know I've been saying a lot about the we can't do, but we've also encouraged people and tried to create the environment for people to report concerns.
Makes me think a little bit about like TSA security, for instance. Sometimes when you travel, it's heightened more than others. are there, knowing what you just said, are there certain days throughout the year where you guys are a little bit more on guard or prepared, such as the day after the election, for instance, where you're kind of pre-planning that if something bad happens, that you're, extra ready?
I think, let me say this, I'm not aware of any at this moment. I won't speak to anything in detail that I'm doing, at work because of the attorney-client privilege stuff, but I would say this. I think any organization should be planning for key event days. I think we should not underestimate that the day after the election is going to be contentious. But if we do remember back 4 years ago, I went to bed thinking one situation was going to happen, and then all of a sudden my phone was burping and beeping at 3 o'clock in the morning with a whole nother reality. And the beauty of America is the world did not come to a halt. We did not, none of our plant-based people refusing to work or punching each other out as a result of it. But I think in this situation, we need to really start planning. But one of the interesting, I'll ask this, you guys, one of the interesting statistics is the day after the Super Bowl is usually one of the worst days, and most of the companies I've ever been to, is probably the worst attendance day ever.
That's when Danielle made that comment. I was actually thinking about the day after Super Bowl, and it's surprising how many random drug screens fall in that week right after Super Bowl.
That's interesting.
Great points. You raised an important point, I think, for a lot of the HR professionals listening to this podcast too. You said attorney-client privilege and certain things that you handle, and you also mentioned communicate concerns. What is the line of when someone should go to HR or legal?
And I take it as this: we have a pretty solid policy of an 800 number, and we start with go to your supervisor. If you're uncomfortable, go to human resources immediately. If you're uncomfortable, go to the legal department. Is that we do encourage people, such as criminal activities, major activities relating to some of those things, we want people to come to legal right away. But the reality is, my most important situation, in my view, is that you get communication rolling in to the right person, and then it goes up through our chain. We really have that's one priority, is having a chain that they can talk. I've had people call me up. I've had people in the hall catch me. I've had, legal's been very much a part of this, but I would rather have somebody not be worried about the title, but go to a person or the 800 anonymous 800 number and get the issue in the queue to make sure that it has visibility and is reported and is worked on.
Now, maybe
Holly, can you and James both address a myth that I always struggle with? A lot of people in organizations I've seen over my years will copy an attorney on an issue and put privilege and confidential on the email, thinking that that's going to privilege that conversation. Can you talk a little bit about that and where the privilege extends and where it stops?
Absolutely. James, this is an area we want to remember. Just because an attorney, the first rule is just because an attorney is on the email does not mean that it is privileged. And there's always, when you need, the reason why there's a privilege that attaches is that you are seeking legal advice from your attorneys on a particular issue. And we do not want people in emails. It's not a good idea in emails just to say, I want legal advice, and then come up with what should I wear today, what color car, you don't ever clothe it that way. But if you need some help, I always start with pick up the phone and call legal. Pick up the phone first, and then also make sure that you do put that it is privileged and confidential and you're seeking a legal opinion. And one other thing that we've always asked people not to do when we beg people, please do not put reply all on these emails. I know there's a need in any organization, you have to have hierarchy. You got to tell your boss's boss, who tells this boss, who tells this boss, and then you get this 17,000 people on an email. If you have a problem and a concern, it's best to probably have you write it to your supervisor and make sure an attorney is then in there. And do not, here's one view I've had, and I don't know where you're at with it, James, is that I would prefer you to give me the facts. Just the facts, sir, ma'am. Do not say, I think I just violated the law. Please do not write those things on an email, because, right?
You took my thunder. My one-on-one lesson, stick to the W's. And when you tell a story in third grade, it's who, what, where, when, why. And then the attorney in me adds two more: witnesses and what do you want. So it's just stick to the facts. but never speak in terms of conclusions like violated a law, harassment, discrimination, illegal. None of those words should be in any of the email communications for sure. And I agree, you don't want to copy people because that could lose any potential privilege that you have depending on who's copied. And I have seen some case law that sometimes even an outside lawyer is more protected than in-house.
And I think there is a tension with, I was just thinking about the who, what, where, when, and why, and all that, and witnesses, and what do you want from lawyers. I think there is kind of an inherent tension with that about, you know, the fact that you put something in writing to a lawyer, that there's like this fear that, oh my God, there's big troubles here. We want the communication. We want people to talk about the facts. And I think the other tension I worry about is, and this is when we say the facts, I don't really want to see the words all written out, but do not write generalized things. I think Holly just said racial slurs. No. And please don't write the word, but just say, you know, maybe spell the word partially, or they said the F word. You don't have to spell it out all the way or something, but we don't want just generalized statements. Tell me what really happened. If there's a video, if someone's got a camera phone or something, I think that was what the new world is. Isn't that the other thing we keep hearing is that the best thing you can have now is your phone. Is, if there's a recording of something, if there's a picture of something, send it. And knowing people's sensitivities about writing words and stuff like that, even if you have to put like the first letter of a word and they put blank, 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 and then say these, I'm uncomfortable writing these, I'll talk to you about them. We really want the facts on this.
So like when Christian comes and says, Vivi pinched me, my first question is, what did you do right before that?
So I gotta ask Collie about your fearless leader, Mary Barrett. I believe she did a stint in human resources.
Yes, she did. She was she ran the human resources function and worked at a plant. So she is just a fantastic person and has been in just about every portion of the company. So it's a great fact that we've got great leaders like that. One of the interesting things, and it hasn't come out at my organization, but I've been talking to some colleagues out in the world, that there is a case coming out that's really interesting, is, the tension when somebody engages in a protest about a working condition. Can you, if I'm angry at Eric for wearing, coming to work at a particular time, and I decide as a protest or a complaint that I don't agree with Eric setting my work hours that way, I'm going to come to work late. Or I don't like the prohibition against using a swear word, so I'm going to go up to Eric and use the swear word. So can you have that considered protected concerted activity because you're complaining about a working condition by violating the work rule? And there's a couple cases right now coming up before the National Labor Relations Board to talk about how far is the boundary of someone's level of protesting. Like, if somebody has a particular opinion that might be racially insensitive, is it okay to share that? Because you're protesting a position that the company or somebody has taken on something, but that's against our work rules for harassment and discrimination. So that's one of the new interesting topics that I've heard coming out. And there is some case law from the 1980s in the National Labor Relations Board saying you don't get to deliberately violate a work rule. But that'll be something for you guys to keep an eye out for.
No, it's fascinating. And obviously I'm pro-defense, so I would support that conduct should not be protected. But I find these type of issues fascinating. I guess along those lines, another issue that you raised was the recording in the workplace. Would you allow someone that's meeting with you to secretly record you and take pictures of you? And do you have any policy on recording private meetings in the workplace? Would you argue that it's confidential information discussions with you and they can't be recording you, or what is your position?
Our company has, I don't know, I'm not sure what exactly, if it's out there publicly, but we have now an organization and others I've worked for have actually have a policy on this. I was actually part of a committee that worked on a policy regarding recording in the workplace, and we are taking a position that you cannot record things in the workplace, period. And the one interesting thing that you can't, obviously if someone's secretly doing something, okay. But one of the things that somebody asked us to think about was what happens if we want, like, you gotta, like this group, we're all in different parts of the country, and, a couple, like they're across the street from Eric and stuff like that and things like that. But the point is, what happens if one of your team was going to miss this and we really wanted people to hear it and viewers to hear it? Would you record it? How do you do practical ones, especially globally? So the theory that we have come out with is that recording in the workplace is banned, period, unless there is, especially like work-related meetings or a seminar or something like that, where we have a director level person or higher have to give written approval from that. And one thing I think, and Jim, you can tell me otherwise, one thing I think people make a confusion about is what we hear on on the news and stuff about one party, two party rules on tape recording, is those are mostly in a criminal context. And yeah, Jim, you're probably closer on this with me, but Michigan, I think, is a one-party state. So the concept of the one-party, two-party is, in one-party states, it says that if one party to a conversation has consented, and it can be the person doing the talking or the person wanting to record the situation, that it is legal from a criminal perspective, but it is not necessarily a civil issue on those type of things. So we have to keep it, and we also, one thing about a policy that you would want also in there is make sure that there is an exception for other countries. If you are going to go beyond just the United States view, if you're going to go out to Canada and global, you do have to say that we will comply with the various laws of other countries on those things, because some countries are very particular about tape recording.
Like the UK is terrible about it. The UK is absolutely terrible about it. Nothing. You can't do anything in the UK ever.
Didn't GM have a large case in Arlington maybe 10 plus years ago where the chairman made some comments and somebody recorded it, and it actually ended up being a whole shakeover in the plant leadership?
And that's unfortunately something that's outside of my knowledge base, because I had not started at GM.
Yeah.
I had started 6 years ago, so I'm not aware of any of that particular issue, so I can't comment on that.
The only reason I remember it is at the time I was in a plant with supporting the UAW, and the chairman came to me and said, "This is the kind of stuff that you guys do that gets chairmans unelected." But
so we're wrapping up. I think as far as some closing thoughts, are there any other hot issues that you're seeing on the horizon? And one that just comes to my mind, you may want to address, is kind of conflicting protected rights, such as someone speaking religious views and someone, maybe speaking out publicly about their sexual orientation. And, what are you seeing and how would you recommend addressing those situations?
I see that as an ongoing trend. And I think we're going to have to really see how that works out with this, because I think that I've seen the religious one in many other organizations too. Somebody actually has a particular gender expression or gender orientation, and the person says, I am a particular religion and I'm totally against it and biased by it. This person must go. And at some level, we have to, nobody is, the point is we can't have harassment, discrimination, and other things on that type of thing. So I always take the position on that I appreciate your view, but that doesn't, if the conduct is harassing. So if somebody takes a position, has a particular orientation or something, and is particularly, or even on the religious side, is proselytizing and trying to force somebody into accepting their view or to, acting on a view, I think that situation falls into your harassment, discrimination policies, because we do need people to remember what are the, I think a friend of mine said once, what do we come to do? We come to work, we make our vehicles or make our product or sell our other thing, and then we go home, take your paycheck and come home. And I think we have to start adopting some of those rules. But I think one of the things I've been thinking of as we go through this conflict with protected rights, no right has one, at least in the American system as I'm aware, no right has one over the other. No, a religious, a disability, a gender and sexual orientation view, a disability view. Nobody has any one hierarchy of rights here, but I think the one hierarchy overriding all this is that we'll deal with each other with respect and non-discrimination and non-retaliation for views. And I think one of the areas there is just, is if someone is actively soliciting people for certain things. I think that's a behavior. You focus on what the behavior is. Another thing I would make a recommendation in closing as we think about all of this stuff is make sure the leadership is really clear with human resources and communication and everybody in legal on how you want to handle these things. Two, make sure you avoid, and again, not to cut down any particular organization or thing we've seen on TV, but how many of these things you see on television with the airlines, where a person is forcibly removed from children, or a person is beat up and forcibly removed from an airplane, and you go back and as you're watching this replayed on national television, you go, what was the root cause of that particular decision? I think we really need people to really think about these decisions and how they play internally to your employees, internally to your leadership, and externally to the brand and the public. Other thing, as we continue the appropriate and absolute need for the debate and the understanding and openness on discussions of racial issues and those type of issues, a lot of companies are getting into this bias, unconscious bias classes and courageous conversation meetings. One thing that has got to beg everybody, beg every HR person on the planet, these are great meetings, but please plan ahead, have your HR leaders and legal part of this, and make sure you set up ground rules for the meeting. You cannot have a meeting where people have a courageous conversation and the person uses a racial slur during the whole meeting. It was just.
It happens. I've seen some. Yeah. People just.
But I think equip those HR people to damage control that. And I think that that's a common thread that we're coming up with is how do you equip your teams for success? I mean, that's a very strong HR theme. But if we're not equipping as senior leaders our teams to handle these situations, we can't be surprised with how they handle it, and if they handle it poorly.
Communications team, and what we've done on some of those types of things for you guys, and I think it's really a worthy thing, is in addition to making sure that the leadership buys into the policy, the implementation, I would even tabletop with the leadership. Some of our teams actually do tabletop with the leadership, tabletop scenario planning just before they have a major initiative to say what could go wrong. So that people have a framework. They don't, you don't have a list of, if this happens, I better go look at this instruction book. It's more of, if this occurs, I know how to stop the behavior, make sure that people are not offended, and how to report the things and get the help right away. But it's really important to tabletop and even scenario plan for some of this.
Awesome. All right, James, you want to lead us out here, young man?
Yeah, just what I got out of this was a lot. It's really refreshing to have a brilliant lawyer share all the inside view and all the strategies of how you're addressing it legally is awesome. But I have a couple of takeaways that I want to emphasize, especially for the HR listeners, is one, never repeat the factual scenario when it's inappropriate to anyone else in the workplace. That is going to be used definitely against you. And I think the other takeaway is that you don't have to know the answer off the top of your head. I think the key is spotting the issues and communicating it up the chain, as Holly mentioned. And, we take all allegations seriously, especially a code of conduct in the workplace. And when you find a neutral, legitimate policy, such as having a certain respect for the workplace, I think that neutral, favorable policy can solve a lot of other issues, even new ones that will arise in the future. So that's a great to find a legitimate, neutral reason to enforce, as opposed to focusing too much on some protected conduct or another distracting issue. And as she said, stick to the facts, but don't share your legal conclusions at all. And don't share your hearsay, educated guesses, and try to pick up the phone. Like, even though we have this digital remote age, pick up the phone and talk about things, because things can be misinterpreted through email exchange.
Awesome. Awesome. Danielle, anything you want to add on to this one?
Yeah, I think the one piece that you talked about that is still sticking out in my mind was your story about the individual who did graffiti in the bathroom, where you found that there was actually something deeper going on emotionally. I think it would be very easy to write off in that situation, as you said, the first grade behavior. It's just all the more emphasis on the fact that, you know, when you see those things, is there instability going on with that employee? And maybe is that just a tremor of things to come? So certainly looking a little bit deeper into those activities is worthwhile. I mean, especially in the day and age where we're talking about EAP utilization and employee mental health. I mean, all things to really kind of consider.
Yep. I like when you said plan, talk to your senior leadership tabletop, plan for these scenarios that you hope it never will happen, but you need to plan for. I don't know how many HR professionals actually have those emergency plans in place, or if they do, they don't practice or talk about them. And then when something does happen, that's when they call James. So no, it's one of those. It's just one of those things like, oh no, that's never going to happen. Our guys are great here, and then like Eric said, something happens, and you walk in, and they're facing off over a hallway. There's like a group here and a group there, and broomsticks. Really, that's something else. Eric.
Yeah, no, for me, Calum, it's just, it highlights, and we're getting into a lot of the fine nuances here, but it really highlights for me, HR is complex, and I know we don't always give it that due, but HR is complex and it's hard. And at the end of the day, I'm going to say what the very first boss I've ever had in HR told me: you're never going to be criticized for doing the right thing. So just remember, we're here for people. Do the right thing by people. Let all the talking heads worry about the nuances, but when you get to the actual day-to-day, make the right choice, do the right thing. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not.
Holly, thanks for coming on. This was an absolute pleasure having someone of your stature, a gigantic company, give us your input and your thoughts. And again, a lot of it will translate to way smaller companies under 50 to 100
Absolutely.
employees. And it was great. Thanks for giving us some insight on how the best do it at General Motors. This is really cool. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
I will
Holly.
go ahead and I'll record this. I'll send the link out in LinkedIn and YouTube or on the podcast. Again, people listening in, give us suggestions. Anyone you want to see come on here after the follow-up. Be great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right.